our topic today is what can I do if I freak out when speaking, or maybe in more academic terms, managing speaking anxiety. So this webinar will address the following questions. So first, what is speaking anxiety? What are the effects of speaking anxiety? What causes speaking anxiety? And then what strategies can I use to overcome speaking anxiety? So there's actually a very scientific term for it's in general foreign language anxiety, xenoglossophobia. It's a feeling of unease, worry, nervousness, apprehension experienced in learning or using a second or foreign language. And it can occur when speaking, listening, reading, or writing, but research has shown that it occurs most often when we're trying to speak in a second language. Elaine Horowitz is one of the pioneers in researching this, and I thought that her language was interesting in her choice of words. That as she was researching, she said, "I did identify a small number of people who were just amazingly freaked out." How academic is that? By their language class. So if you feel amazingly freaked out or just a little bit freaked out, you're not alone. Up to 1/3 of foreign language learners experience at least a moderate level of foreign language anxiety, so 1 in 3. This can occur at all proficiency levels, so sometimes you might think, oh, you're just a beginner learner and that's, you know, you don't know much, and maybe when you learn more, or you think maybe people who know more don't feel that anxiety, but that's not true. It can occur at all proficiency levels. And there's, it does have an impact on your language learning. So an estimated 25% of varying achievement levels among students could possibly be related to language anxiety. And that's a figure that was given by Elaine Horowitz. So there are at least some researchers who think that it could have at least a 25% effect on how well you actually acquire the language. So it is kind of can be a big deal. So how do we experience language anxiety? What are the effects, especially of speaking anxiety? This one researcher, Eisnick, identified sort of 2 components, the worry component and then the emotional component. So the worry component are things that are more in your mind. So as you're feeling anxiety, maybe you're comparing yourself to your peers. If you're in a class with other people, you're worried about how much better the other person is doing than you, or how much more they're producing. You're thinking about the consequences of failing, of what's going to happen when you make that mistake. It leads to a loss of confidence, increased anxiety. Sometimes you can get anxious about your anxiousness, and it's sort of this spiral. It can cause you to forget things or for your mind to go blank. And then it also leads to an inability to concentrate. So that emotional reaction or that worry can interfere with your ability to process in class and your ability to learn. So those are the worry components. Then the emotional components, these I think are the more like physical symptoms of feeling anxiety. So it could be shaking, sweating, your heart rate increases. Some people have even reported feeling dizziness or nausea, feelings of panic, or just kind of freezing and not being able to move forward. So those are some common symptoms. So if you've experienced any of those. There has been quite a bit of research done on foreign language anxiety, and in particular speaking anxiety. So if you are interested, Elaine Horowitz and some colleagues of hers back in 1986 developed this assessment for sort of measuring your speaking anxiety or diagnosing your speaking anxiety. And it's something that teachers can use with their students in the classroom, or researchers can use. But I'm actually going to have Jessica share a PDF of this survey in the chat, just in case you're interested and you want to take a look at it. But you can see it's sort of, I think it's 33 questions. that kind of identify some of the effects or maybe some of the symptoms of speaking anxiety or language learning anxiety in general. So in your own time, you can kind of look at that and see what you relate to. It might be just kind of interesting to see that, you know, maybe some people are experiencing things that are much worse than you are, or, you know, that there are other people who are experiencing what you're experiencing. So yeah, Jessica shared that PDF in the chat. So let's talk briefly about some of the causes of speaking anxiety. One thing that can aggravate the anxiety is the difficulty of the language being learned. So if you are learning a very difficult language, such as Mandarin or Arabic, that can cause a lot of anxiety because you know this is hard, this is challenging, and you may get nervous about that. Another thing that can cause anxiety is just a misconception about the difficulty of language learning. Maybe you thought it was going to be easy, and as you get into it, it's much more difficult than you anticipated. So that can cause some stress. But it's important to realize this is a process that happens over a lot of time, and so there's nothing quick and easy about it, despite what some language learning apps or programs may promise. It is a difficult process. Sometimes the anxiety is caused by a perception of your own ability or your own lack of ability. So I think there's a stereotype, you know, that, you know, Europeans are much better at language learning than Americans, and Americans aren't very good at learning a language. And so if you have that kind of thought about, you know, your own culture, or even about your own self, that you're not a very good language learner, that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that can be an issue. Another thing is that you can have kind of an identity crisis when you're learning a second language. In your first language, you're able to express your personality and usually your thoughts pretty much how you want them to be expressed. In a second language, you're much more limited. And so therefore there's this tension between what you want to say and what you can't say. And so you feel like a different person than you are when speaking your first language. And that can cause a lot of issues and anxiety. There are also a lot of personality variables. You know, some of us are introverts rather than extroverts, and speaking can naturally cause us anxiety even in our first language. So, you know, if you have a fear of public speaking in English, you probably will have a fear of speaking in the target language as well. And also some of us are just a little bit more perfectionists than others, and that's not a great way to be when you're thinking about trying to speak a foreign language. Research has also identified sort of a couple sources for anxiety. So we kind of talked about the learner, that we ourselves, sometimes our personal beliefs and our natural level of anxiety can lead to speaking anxiety. Sometimes it can be your interactions with your teacher. So sometimes the teacher's beliefs or your interactions with the teacher can also sometimes cause anxiety. Some of the things that they mentioned were if you get called on, if you're in a group class, you get called on unexpectedly, or even the anticipation of knowing that you're going to have to speak in class can be distracting and cause some issues. Or it could even be the way that your teacher is correcting you can cause some issues. And there can also be sort of the classroom environment, some of the classroom procedures that maybe you don't love, things that you maybe dread in the class every day, or language testing as well, preparing for that can be a cause of anxiety. And then there are also kind of three aspects of this anxiety. So the first is communication apprehension, and that's a fear to communicate with others, talk in groups. It's related to stage fright. So anytime that you're conversing, having that conversation. Test anxiety is not only like test anxiety of, you know, being nervous about taking the OPI, but it's a fear of failing to perform when the time comes. So if you know that you're gonna have to order food at a restaurant, or if you know that you're going to have a conversation with a coworker or with your in-laws or something like that, you can have that anxiety of not being able to do that when the time comes. And then also the fear of negative evaluation of others. So you're worried about what others are thinking about you, whether it's your teacher or your classmates, the people that you're talking with. All of these things contribute. So now that we've talked about some of the effects and the causes, I want to dive into what are some of the things that we can actually do about it. And this first set comes with recognizing it, acknowledging that you are feeling this fear. Some people say, you know, oh, just push past it or ignore it. That's not necessarily helpful, because then you maybe start getting anxious about how you're feeling. So if you are feeling anxious when you're trying to speak, just acknowledge it, you know, recognize it, that it's there, and try to understand where it's coming from. Like, what is the source and the cause of that, and identify maybe problem situations or areas, which some of you I think already have, as we were kind of talking in the poll earlier, but really try and identify those situations or areas that are going to cause you issues, so that you're more prepared to choose strategies that can help you overcome them. Okay. The best thing that you can do, unfortunately, if you have speaking anxiety, is to speak. There's really no way that you can get around it. So one thing that you can do is just practice speaking every day. Set little goals for yourself and try small speaking tasks. One thing that you can do that might help is practice. Practice in front of the mirror, or you can practice in front of your webcam or your phone's video feature. You can record yourself if you want, and listen back and try and identify ways that you could do better. But more than anything, you know, just practice speaking, and focus on the situations that you need to rehearse. So if you do have a presentation that you need to give in the target language, practice those presentational things. If you're going to have sort of small talk and chit chat with a family member who speaks the target language, or someone, a friend, a coworker, focus on the language that you're going to need for that specific situation and practice that. One thing that is really going to be helpful is to practice some basic communication strategies. So in the target language, learn phrases that you can use to ask for clarification. If you didn't understand exactly what someone said, asking them to rephrase, asking someone to slow down when they speak. Circumlocution is a communication strategy that you can use when you're talking. So if your mind goes blank for a certain word that you're looking for, try and find a way to describe what it is that you're talking about. That's what circumlocution is. So kind of talking around the word that you're missing. So one thing that you can do when you're at home talking to yourself in the mirror is, even if you can remember the word that you want, try and think of a way that you can describe what you're saying. And the more that you practice that, the more naturally it'll come up, or hopefully the more naturally it will come up when you're in a speaking situation and you need to draw on those skills. They'll be a little more automatic. You'll have kind of that bank that you've practiced, and you'll be able to pull those out when you need them. Another thing that you can do is to learn filler words. So little phrases and things that kind of connect ideas and sentences, things that you can say that will buy you a little bit of time to think. So you can kind of be continuing the conversation by using these fillers, even while you're thinking of what is it that I wanted to say next. So those I think are some good things that you can try. So when you're ready to start talking with someone else rather than just practicing at home and kind of preparing, one thing that would be helpful is to focus on one-on-one conversations. So that's going to be a lot easier than talking in a group. First of all, there's only one person giving you input, only one person that you have to listen and respond to. But it can also help you control the conversation a little bit better. And one thing that you might want to consider is the person that you're talking to, right? You want to find someone who's going to be positive and supportive, who makes you feel comfortable. If you've ever been speaking publicly or in a group, your face kind of naturally you naturally gravitate toward the people who are smiling, who are friendly, who are nodding, who seem to be supportive and listening. So you want to find somebody like that rather than somebody who's not going to give you much back. And if you are having trouble finding a speaking partner in your circle of acquaintances, there are some online services where you can be matched up with native speakers of the language, and that might be helpful. Also, this may go without saying sometimes, but set ground rules for some of your interactions. So hopefully this supportive, helpful, positive person is not going to insult you for making mistakes, but sometimes in the classroom, maybe when you're speaking around the other students, there can be a little bit of friendly teasing that happens. If you're not comfortable with that, then maybe ask the teacher, can we set a ground rule that's not the case, if that's causing you some of the anxiety. Another thing that may be helpful that some people have suggested is to find another non-native speaker of the language who speaks really well or who does really well, and kind of use them as a role model. Sometimes if you're constantly comparing yourself to your teacher or to native speakers, it can be overwhelming and frustrating. But if you find a non-native speaker, you can kind of see what they've been able to accomplish, and not compare yourself, but have something to aspire to. And they also may be able to give you tips and hints specific to your target language that would be helpful for you. Okay. So when it comes time to move beyond your very controlled set of circumstances, speaking with your friend, and maybe you have to speak with strangers, try small speaking tasks first. So things like ordering food, asking for directions, though that may be difficult if you're in the US, but if you happen to be in the target region or in a place where a lot of people use the target language, that might be easier. But try to start small and find small things that you can do that are kind of concrete and contained. And then prepare for them. Again, think about the questions that you might be asked. Think about the vocabulary that you might need to use. Practice certain phrases that might come up. And I think one thing that might be helpful when you're in those interactions is not to think the worst of the other people. Think about how you respond when a non-native speaker of English comes to you and asks you a question. Chances are you're not judging them for how poorly their grammar was, but you're more interested in helping them. And so try not to be concerned about what the other person is thinking of you. Most people are fairly understanding. So try and remind yourself of that. Think, okay, if I were in this person's shoes, how would I feel? And try to remember that even as the anxiety kind of grips you. Okay, so we've all heard fake it till you make it. Sometimes you just need to kind of fake confidence. Smiling goes a long way, so when you're feeling anxious, just try and put on a brave face and get through the interaction. Also, don't be afraid to take the time that you need. So before responding to something, go ahead and take a deep breath. If your mind goes blank, breathe, think, take time to process. And if you can kind of calm some of those initial emotional responses, then the words might have a chance to come. So go ahead and and take the time that you need as you're speaking, and maybe use some of those phrases that you've been practicing, like I'm a new learner, you know, please be patient, things like that. So the idea of making mistakes is tough. And sometimes when we make a mistake, then we have a tendency to freeze. But it's important that you keep speaking even when you make a mistake. In your class and in your interactions with your friends that you're talking to who may be target language speakers, don't expect them or ask to be corrected immediately when you make a mistake, because that kind of interruption to your thought process can really derail you and do more harm than it does good. So when you're speaking, focus more on the content of what you're saying than on the accuracy of what you're saying. And I know that's really difficult. Some of us really like to think carefully, put together the perfect sentences, and then deliver them. But as much as possible when you're practicing, try to focus more on the content than the grammar of it, so that you can just kind of let the language flow a little bit more. And then look at mistakes as learning opportunities. So afterward, instead of kind of beating yourself up for, oh, I can't believe I said that, that was really dumb, what must they be thinking, or look at that mistake as a learning opportunity. Chances are, if you've made a really embarrassing mistake, you probably will remember it and learn from it and not do it again. So try to make that a positive thing. And finally, expect a certain amount of discomfort.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. Just a little internet hiccup, but I think we'll be back online in 1 minute here.
Okay, apologies. My internet went out. But let me go ahead and share the screen again. And I'm not sure at what point my internet went out, but kind of the final strategy is to expect a certain amount of discomfort in the language learning process. In conclusion, remember that a lot of people feel anxiety when speaking in a foreign language. You're not alone. Try to understand the causes of your anxiety so that you can choose strategies that kind of address your concern. And then do the best that you can to face your fears, to push through the discomfort, to remember that people generally are more understanding than maybe we think they are when we're feeling anxious. But just do the best that you can. And the more that you practice, the more that you prepare, the better prepared you'll be to be able to communicate and speak effectively, even in the face of that anxious feeling. So with that, we're going to move into the discussion portion of our webinar.